To find this book and others like it, you can go to store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
This is Ancient Faith Today with Father Tom Soroka, a weekly live call-in show addressing the issues of our day from a distinctly Orthodox perspective. You can join the conversation by calling in at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Father Tom is the priest at St. Nicholas Orthodox Church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and welcomes guests from across the globe to discuss important topics of interest. Here's Father Tom.
Welcome to Ancient Faith Today. This is Father Tom Soroka, and I'm so glad that you're with us this evening. We'll be taking your calls in a bit at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. John will be answering your calls tonight, so please make sure to turn the show volume off before you come on air. You can also join us in the chat room, which is now open, by going to ancientfaith.com/live. Another way to connect with us is to go to facebook.com/ancientfaithtoday and place your question in the thread for tonight's show. You can also send us an email at aft@ancientfaith.com. And remember that our live show is being simulcast weekly on the AFR Facebook and YouTube pages. So let's get started. Last week, we discussed the sad events in Istanbul, marking the conversion of the Hagia Sophia Cathedral into a mosque by the Turkish government. That episode spurred a great interest among our listeners to hear more about the history of Islam and how it affected many of our traditionally Orthodox Christian lands and our church. In order to fully understand why the conversion of Hagia Sophia to a mosque was so important to certain Islamists, we have to understand the backstory. What is the history of Islam, and why does it loom so large in the Middle East? What is the meaning of jihad? Is the claim that Islam was spread by violence true? Is the Islam of history different than the Islam of today? Here to discuss those questions and the history of Islam, as well as the contemporary reality of the Muslim world, is Dr. Timothy Furnish. Dr. Furnish holds a PhD in Islamic Studies from Ohio State University. He's an adjunct professor at Reinhardt University in Georgia and a former counterterrorism advisor to the U.S. military and a U.S. Army veteran. He's lectured at the U.S. Army War College, Concordia Seminary, Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and at Islamic centers in England and Iran. He frequently appears on national and local radio programs commenting on geopolitical issues relating to the Muslim world. He's a specialist in Islamic eschatology and messianism. He's the author of numerous books on the subject of Islam, as well as on Middle Earth in the writings of Tolkien. Dr. Timothy Furnish, welcome to Ancient Faith Today.
It's an honor, Father Tom. Thank you.
Well, I'm so glad. We've been Facebook friends for quite a while, but now I get to kind of have you all to myself and to share your rich knowledge about Islam with our listeners. So I'm really looking forward to that. But before we get to the subject at hand, let's talk a little bit about you and your educational background, your religious background. How did you get interested in all of this? And I know you have a little bit of an interest in Orthodoxy too. So tell us all about yourself.
Well, you hit the important parts, but basically I was raised Southern Baptist, and while I was my first stint in the Army, I became a Lutheran, and I've been a Lutheran ever since, although I have read a lot of Orthodox theology. I'm still wading through St. Theophan the Recluse. I'm still trying to finish that.
I'm a big fan of his.
But I do have an Orthodox Study Bible, which I use quite a bit. But I am a member of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, so it's one of the more conservative Lutheran denominations, not to be confused with some of the others that have maybe left the bounds of small o orthodoxy anyway. But been a Christian, as you said, a veteran. I got interested in Islam actually because I enlisted in the Army back in the 80s and was one of the few at the time sent to learn Arabic. This was in the 80s, of course, during the Cold War, and most people that wound up in intelligence and linguists going to be trained as linguists got trained in Russian, right?
Right.
But I was one of the few, the proud, the lucky, I guess, that got Arabic, and so I went through Arabic in the Army, did my time in the 101st Airborne, and got out, and actually did a master's degree in theology at Concordia, St. Louis, which is Missouri Synod Seminary, right?
Oh,
and
that's good to know.
then went to Ohio State for my doctorate. Then I taught college for a number of years. Then I worked as an advisor to Special Operations Command for about 5 years on Islamic movements in Africa and other places. And then been writing. And then a few years ago, I went back to work just part-time, but took a teaching position at Reinhardt University, which is a small Methodist school up here in North Georgia. So that brings you up to date.
That's fantastic. And I know when I peruse your Facebook, as I said, you have an interest in Tolkien, but you also have an interest in swords, right? Or in swordsmanship.
Yeah, I started fencing about, 2012. So it was 8 years ago. And did epee for a while. My sons were at a point where they were in between certain sports. So they were in the middle school. So they fenced with me for a while. They fenced for about 5 years, actually. Then they got into football. And as my younger son said, fencing wasn't violent enough. So football, he preferred football. But I switched to saber a few years ago, which was not a smart thing to do because saber is more, I don't know. You have to be more energetic for saber, and since I'm going to hit 60 next month, that was probably not a wise choice. But I've got all the equipment
keeps
now,
you
so
young.
I have to use it. So, well, it gets me off the couch. Let's put it that way. I'm not sure it keeps me young, but
That's great. That's great. Well, let's get to the subject at hand. Thanks so much for sharing all of that. What I really want to do this evening is kind of look at the big picture. Now, obviously, we are an Orthodox Christian show on an Orthodox Christian network, so we want to promote Orthodox Christian values and teaching and so forth. And again, some listeners might question, well, why are you talking about Islam? And obviously, we want to make it clear that, we're not here to promote Islam. However, even a cursory understanding of Orthodox history, you run into Islam, whether you like it or not, that there is an intersection there in our encounter as Orthodox Christians, and of course, even the West with Islam. So what I'd like you to do is, if you would please start from the beginning and tell us a little bit about how Islam started. Tell us about Muhammad. Kind of give us the short story, because we do have a lot to talk about tonight, and we want to eventually get to the part where we're talking about how Islam spread. But tell us first, how did Islam start, and a little bit about Muhammad, if you would, please.
Okay. And yeah, that's a very interesting observation and true observation, Father Tom, that of the three major branches of Christianity, Orthodoxy, Catholicism, and Protestantism, Orthodoxy has certainly had, I think it's safe to say, the most dealings with the Islamic world, geographically, of course, and in terms of politics and in particular, so which we can get into more in a bit. So Muhammad, one thing I want to say is a caveat I always give in my world history and in my some of my other classes where I teach about Islam, Middle East history class in particular, that a lot of what is put forward as factual about Muhammad may not be factual. Like, for instance, there are some scholars sort of on the margins, but there are some that would argue, for instance, that Muhammad is not even a real historical figure. And the reason for this, I think he is, but one could make this argument because, unlike, say, with Jesus, there's no corroborating evidence outside of the faith community itself. There's really no contemporary Byzantine articles that say, there's this prophet down in Arabia named Muhammad, this guy claiming to be a prophet causing problems. A few years later, they find out, of course, the after effects of the Islamic conquest as they get into Byzantine territory. But I mean, for instance, compare that with Jesus. I mean, we can go to Suetonius, we can go to Tacitus, we can go to Josephus, right? And we have extra biblical, we have non-believers accounts, that is, I guess you could say, of Jesus. So we know he's a historical figure. We actually don't have that for Muhammad. But that said, the traditional view that's put forward is that Muhammad was born somewhere around 570 AD, and he died somewhere around 632. I mean, you'll see those given as exact dates, but no one knows for sure those are the exact dates. And the traditional account, again, which draws entirely upon Islamic sources, says that Muhammad was basically raised in the city of Mecca. At one point, he was orphaned, raised by his uncle. He became a caravan trader by marrying a woman who was older than him and widowed, who actually had a caravan business she had inherited to some degree from her late husband. And the story is that Muhammad, at some point in his life, used to go to caves outside of Mecca and meditate or pray, and presumably to the pagan gods, because the Arabs at the time were polytheistic pagans, basically, with multiple gods. In fact, the Kaaba in Mecca, which was turned into sort of the cult center of Islam, was basically a temple, like sort of a small temple with pagan idols in it. So anyway, again, the traditional account is that Muhammad, at the age of 40, which would have been around the year, help me, I'm a historian, I can't do math, Father Tom, that would be 610, right? That he if I could have done math, I'd have become a political scientist.
We like you just where you are.
So the traditional account is that Muhammad started receiving visions or revelations, and this initially was, according to Muslim claims, the angel Jibril. That is, they claim it's the same angel as Gabriel, of course, in the scriptures, and that throughout the rest of his life until he died, Muhammad periodically would receive revelations from, sometimes mediated through Jibril, sometimes directly from Allah. And then these were, of course, after his death, collected into his sayings were collected into and written down and redacted into the Quran. Muhammad was in Mecca. Again, traditional account says he came back to Mecca, started preaching about his belief that Allah, who was speaking to him, either directly or indirectly, was the same God that Jews and Christians worshipped. We can deconstruct that in a bit if you'd like. But that was that's of course the primary contention of Muslims, that Allah is the same God that Jews and Christians worship, but that Muhammad has been given the final revelation. Basically, Islamic theology in a nutshell is that Jews were given a revelation of one God from God. They corrupted the message after about 1,200 years. Jesus is sent with another message, because Jesus in Islam is merely a prophet. He's sent with another sort of collection of prophecies, of instruction from God, from Allah. And then after only 600 years, because according to the Islamic teaching, it only takes the Christians half as long to screw it up as it did the Jews, Muhammad is then sent as the final prophet. So, for instance, if you read the Quran, and then some other things which are called the hadiths, which are the alleged sayings of Muhammad, of which there are multi-volume collections of these things, there's a lot of stuff in there about Jesus, and Jesus does miracles in the Quran, but Jesus ultimately is outranked by Muhammad because in Islamic belief, Muhammad comes after him. So, but that's all developed eventually. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say that you had mentioned, for instance, the angel Gabriel and Jesus, who they call Isa, and they talk about Miriam, Mary. But they're sort of like there's a parallelism there, but I think the idea is that somehow they have a different view of all of these people, right? The Jesus of Christianity is not really the Jesus of Islam. The Gabriel of Christianity is not really the Gabriel of Islam. The Mary, etc. Right? I mean, there's sort of a what's the word, distortion of those people in Islam, right?
Right. Like, of course, that's most important with Jesus. And Isa, which is what the Quran calls Jesus, is merely a prophet, as I said. He several times in the Quran is said to deny divinity. There's no divinity about him. He's not the son of God. He was born of a virgin. The Quran does say that, but he's a prophet. The crucifixion, not just crucifixion, but the death itself of Jesus is denied. The Quran says, and this is also amplified in a number of these hadiths, which also talks about this, says that Jesus was not crucified, but one that was made, the Arabic translates roughly as one that was made to look like him, was killed in his place. And then Jesus was basically taken to heaven, sort of like Elijah or something. And so the Quran, so it can't be the same Jesus because there's no crucifixion, there's no resurrection, there's no atonement, therefore. Right. So it's not even remotely the same Jesus. Right.
You had mentioned about the Kaaba and the pagan idols being destroyed in Mecca, that was that center of paganism. Tell us a little bit about the Middle East and that particular area in the time of Muhammad, because my understanding is that the Christianity that he kind of pulls from, or that he has interface with, is not really Orthodox Christianity, right? It's kind of maybe either a Nestorianism or it is a kind of a Gnosticism, but that's where a lot of these words, rather these ideas, distorted ideas about Jesus and Mary come from, is this distortion of Christianity in that area. Is that correct?
Right. There's a lot of historical evidence, despite the, of course, present regime that rules there, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, specifically in Arabia, to deny it. There's a lot of evidence that there were Christian communities in Arabia in Muhammad's time, which had been in 6th century AD, early 7th century AD. We know for a fact, for instance, there was a quite fairly large Christian population down in Najran, which is down toward Yemen. But there's also evidence of monasteries in the desert. Of course, the Byzantine Empire, which of course was Christian, or the Eastern Roman Empire properly, I should say, had penetrated as far south as Jordan. There were Confederate tribes, particularly in what is now Jordan and Syria, allied to the Byzantines and had converted to Christianity. But you're exactly right. Remember, there were a number of heretical groups and sort of more marginal Christian groups that may have not been happy with the edicts coming from Constantinople, so they had moved out of the area. And for instance, Nestorians, Monophysites, other groups, and for instance, to hook up to what we were talking about a minute ago.
Dr. Timothy, are you there?
Oh, are you there, Father Tom?
Yeah, we're here.
Oh, somehow the mute button went on. I don't know what happened. No, I think I did it, but I don't know how. Sorry about that.
So you were talking about the heretical Christians in that particular area.
And I said, to hook back up to what we were talking about earlier in terms of these garbled ideas that Islam seems to have about what for instance, the New Testament teaches. There's some stuff in the Quran about Jesus that sounds like it was cribbed straight out of some of the apocryphal gospels, like particularly the Gospel of Thomas, which of course is not really a gospel, right? Some of these books that didn't make it into the canon of Scripture, the Quran in one passage, I'd have to go look it up, I don't remember it exactly, but I've read it, where it has Jesus as a little boy making clay birds and throwing them up into the air and they become alive. Sure. And that's of course non-canonical,
right out of apocryphal gospels.
Right.
Sure.
Right. Yeah. So I think the reason for the garbled understanding again, or the corrupted understanding of Jesus and other figures from the New Testament, probably a lot of it can be laid at that the Muhammad sources were those sorts of things.
Very good. Good. All right, 1-855-AF Radio. That's 1-855-237-2346. We are talking with Dr. Timothy Furnish, and we're talking about Islam and the history of Islam and how it interfaces with Orthodoxy. We're not there yet, but we're about to get there. If you are interested in Islam, if you are a former Muslim, if you are a Muslim and you're listening in, we'd love to hear from you tonight. Dr. Furnish, so we talked a little bit about how Islam started, talked a little bit about Muhammad. What would you say are the major points of difference between Islam and Christianity? If you had to compare the two religions, you talked a little bit about the idea, that they worship one God. And so there's always this controversy. Is it the same God? Is it a different God? Who is Allah? And so forth. So just tell us a little bit about this. What are the differences between Islam and Christianity?
Well, the central one, of course, is the one we've touched on already, which is that Jesus is entirely different. So you see these billboards. I've seen these even around here, put up by Muslim organizations. We heart Jesus. Well, the problem is the Jesus you heart's not the real Jesus, unfortunately. Again, not crucified, therefore not resurrected, no atonement at all. And that, I think, also leads to what strikes me as maybe the second biggest difference is, despite all of these verbiage in Islam and all of the sayings about how merciful Allah is, he's not very merciful at all. He's really more sort of a almost strictly uber Old Testament kind of figure. He's very much a God of wrath and judgment. And there's really, I've read the Quran, I've read a lot of the Hadiths, and I've read a lot of Islamic history, and just not a whole lot of mercy and mercifulness there. It's basically just kind of hardcore.
Ross in the chat room is asking, is the word love in the Quran? Is the word love in the Quran?
I'm trying to think. Have I seen the word hib or hub, which is the word love, in the Quran? I cannot recall seeing it. I'd probably have to go back and look, but I can't think of any famous passages where it occurs. So that's not to say it's not there. It probably is there somewhere, but I don't think it shows up in any of the famous passages. So,
and I would assume he's speaking about, God is love. So in other words, even if the word love is in there, human love, but the question is Allah, I should say, referred to as love?
No.
Like John does.
No, I can categorically say that. There's nothing in the Quran about greater love hath no man than lay down his life for his friends. That's not in there either. So no, it's not. Interesting.
He has another question here, and this is actually a good one. Before we talk a little bit about how Islam was spread, but are Muslims iconoclasts? Are all Muslims iconoclasts?
Oh, that's a very orthodox question, isn't it? Yes, it's capital O. That's a good way to put it. They are, or we could call them Calvinists, I guess, too, if we really wanted to be ecumenical. Yes, in fact, you probably know this, Father Tom, that there's an argument that the iconoclast controversy in the 8th century perhaps was inspired by Muslims. There's an argument about that. Yeah. Absolutely. I won't wade into that. You know more about that than I do. But yes, I think that's a safe way to put it, because I won't say no symbolism is allowed. There is a very strong strain in Islam that, for instance, human beings should not be shown. Now, let me temper that by saying that is not universal in Islam. So we can't say that all Muslims are like that. I mean, I've often, I've had conversations both in real time and virtually with Muslims before who will tell me, you could never show a prophet. I'm like, oh, really? Well, here's some artwork from the Ottoman Empire that shows the Prophet Muhammad. But they're like, where did you get that? I'm like, Topkapi Palace collection. I didn't make it up. Trust me, I can't draw or paint that well.
But then why are Muslims today portrayed as being completely iconoclastic? And it seems like the most vocal Muslims portray themselves as iconoclastic too.
Yeah,
they kill artists who would draw Muhammad, and of course we have that attack in France on that magazine and so forth.
Charlie Hebdo, yeah. And it's because of that, Father Tom, because they are willing. The fundamentalists, the Quranic literalists, as I like to call them, which I think is more accurate, who believe that you should not show any prophets' faces at all and would be the true iconoclasts, are fanatical and often violent. And so they basically browbeat people into getting their way. And they are so loud and strident about it that they have convinced many in the media that they are the only voice. And so that's really, they've kind of just come to dominate the conversation because they're so obnoxious and because they're willing to use violence.
But on the other hand, doesn't that play into the narrative, into their narrative that says that Islam is misunderstood and Islam is misrepresented by the world, that they are really peaceable people and it's a peaceable religion?
Well, it's like that one famous meme someone made, which I think was actually was a poster of a guy in London that said, behead those who call Islam non-peaceful or something like that. It's, you can't expect logic from the media, of course, Father Tom, and we can get into that reasons why I think the media is so pro-Islamic in a bit. But anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, well, I was just going to, please finish your thought, because that's important for us to understand. In other words, there was a time not too long ago before Corona, before, we're sort of distracted by all of this. And the favorite enemy of the United States was the Middle East. Now it's Russia, of course. And, or now it's our president, I'm not sure. And the idea that Islam is peaceful was really the rallying cry against what was called Islamophobia. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, where's the truth there? Where does the truth lie? You as a I would say an objective scholar, you don't have a dog in this fight. You are not Islamic. So when you read the sources, when you read the history, because that's really what we want to talk about next, is Islam violent?
My answer to that is what I've been saying for years, is when the Quran and the Hadiths and the life of Muhammad is taken literally and followed literally, how can it not be violent? The Quran enjoins violence against unbelievers, unbelievers being anyone who's not Muslim. Muhammad led armies in battle. Muhammad ordered opponents beheaded. And this is from the Islamic sources. I always tell people this is not from, Sean Hannity, or this is not from, for someone like that. This is the factual data of what Islamic history has shown us and what Muslims say they believe. And so I will often talk about, for instance, the reason why it's so hard to delegitimize, even in the Islamic world, ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Boko Haram or the Taliban. The reason it's so hard to delegitimize them is because they aren't doing anything radical or extreme. Those are probably the two most overused words in any discussion of Islam, are radical and extreme. It is neither radical nor extremist to wage jihad, to fight in what's called jihad fi sabilillah, jihad in the path of Allah, because the Quran, the sayings of Muhammad, and the very life of Muhammad all prove that those are not just valid, but those are enjoined upon Muslims to do. And so when ISIS, I used to read that ISIS magazine when it came out regularly back when I was working on ISIS all the time, that Dabiq magazine they used to publish, and every magazine was chock full of Quranic sites and citations to these hadiths, again, these alleged sayings of Muhammad's. And Al-Qaeda and the other groups did it too, but no one did it like ISIS. And basically, what they would say was, well, we're the good Muslims because the Quran says to behead the unbelievers. We're beheading the unbelievers. The Quran says that you can take yes, you could take the infidel women as your wives and concubines. We're doing all that. Those of you Muslims that don't do it, you're the bad Muslims. And literally speaking, they have the upper hand in the argument, which is why it's so hard to delegitimize them.
What about the idea that the word jihad, you had used that word jihad, it doesn't mean physical war, but it simply means spiritual struggle. And these groups like ISIS and so forth have, again, distorted the true view of Islam, that jihad is simply a spiritual struggle.
Well, that would have been news to Khalid bin Walid, who invaded the Byzantine Empire and beat them at the Battle of Yarmouk in 636, that, he should have been just coming up into Byzantine territory and handing out brochures door to door. He just did not get the message correctly. And Muhammad himself, I mean, the people that make that argument are either willfully obtuse or just ignorant. 2 points about it. The verb jahada, the Arabic verb jahada, which jihad comes from, verbal noun form, does literally mean to struggle and to exert effort. So it can be used in other contexts, but if you look at all of the commentators, if you look at the way it's used in the Quran, if you look at the way it's used in the Hadiths, and if you look at the way it's been applied across history, starting with Muhammad up till from Muhammad to ISIS, if you will, the word jihad does not mean, brushing your teeth well or brushing your teeth like the Prophet did. The word jihad means to fight infidels, to fight what's called, on behalf of the Dar al-Islam, the world of Islam, against the Dar al-Harb. The rest of the world that's not Muslim is the world, literally the translation is a world of war, Dar al-Harb. And the Quran and the Hadiths say that the entire world basically is to be battled until it submits or converts to Islam. Doesn't mean go teach everybody how to brush their teeth like Muhammad.
Yeah, I mean, it's rather shocking when you learn about that. Just to play devil's advocate here for a second, in the church we say the same thing. There's the church and there's the world. Right? We talk about the church and the world. These are really two different things. The Didache says there are two ways. There's a way that leads to life and a way that leads to death. And that's really what that means. But, we don't say let's wage war, physical war on the world. We say let Christ kill us. I mean, we are dying so that Christ can live in us. So I think the emphasis is completely different in Orthodoxy.
The Great Commission says, go and make disciples, baptizing in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. It doesn't say go and slay those that won't be baptized. That's the difference. And the other thing you mentioned, before I forget, Father Tom, a moment ago, there is this sort of secondary argument, you mentioned it a moment ago, that the primary meaning of jihad is is peaceful, and the secondary meaning of jihad is the warfare meaning. And actually, this again comes from a hadith. The Quran doesn't say this. There's a hadith that says something to that effect. And again, the hadiths are alleged sayings of Muhammad. There are tens of thousands of hadiths, multi-volume collections. Some of them probably are legitimate, probably do go back to Muhammad. Many of them are simply fabricated to support one or another various political faction in the early Islamic community. But there is hadith that says something to that effect. But the Islamic scholars, I've looked at this hadith, even the Islamic scholars say that hadith is almost certainly fabricated. It was probably invented later on and put into the mouth of Muhammad in order to make him look better.
Interesting. All right. 1-855-AF radio. That's 1-855-237-60 2346. We're talking with Dr. Timothy Furnish about the history of Islam. And after this break, we're going to talk a little bit about the interface of Orthodox Christian history with Islam and what happened when the Islamic armies came into the Byzantine Empire. Let's go for a break, and we will be right back.
Father Tom will be back in a moment. In the meantime, the lines are open at 855-237-2346. Don't go away.
Saint Ignatius, 1st century bishop of Antioch, called the God-bearer, is one of the earliest witnesses to the truth of Christ and the nature of the Christian life. Tradition tells us that as a small child, Ignatius was singled out by Jesus himself as an example of the childlike faith all Christians must possess. In Bearing God, Father Andrew Damick recounts the life of this great pastor, martyr, and saint, and interprets for the modern reader 5 major themes in the pastoral letters he wrote: martyrdom, salvation in Christ, the bishop, the unity of the church, and the Eucharist.
For Ignatius, martyrdom is really the fullness of Christian life in a sense, which that can be challenging for us because, number one, he doesn't seem to have any reticence at all about going to martyrdom. Like there's no sense of, well, this is what I have to do. You know, I wish I didn't have to, but this is God's will for me. He is going to it joyfully, gladly.
To find this book and others like it, you can go to store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Ancient Faith Today and Father Tom Soroka. Give us a call at 855-237-2346. Here once again is Father Tom.
We're back with Dr. Timothy Furnish, and we're talking about the history of Islam and the Orthodox encounters with Islam. So, Dr. Timothy, let's actually get to that specific part of it. You talked a little bit about Muhammad being involved in some military campaigns. My understanding is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was 632, maybe it was 635, when right after the death of Muhammad, the Islamic incursion into Syria, into Damascus. So walk us through that history where Islam starts to spread, and is it true, unlike Christianity that is spread through the disciples and the apostles going out throughout the world, and those disciples being killed for the sake of the faith and being martyred for the faith, we have in Islam the idea of kind of a military expansion to spread Islam. So walk us through from the death of Muhammad on into the Byzantine Empire. Dr. Furnish, are you there? We can't hear you. Dr. Furnish, are you there? John, do we have Dr. Furnish? John, can we check Dr. Furnish's connection, please?
Yes, we'll try to get back in touch with him. Let me get to a break here and see if we can reach him.
Okay, very good. We will be right back with, God willing, Dr. Timothy Furnish. Hold on.
Father Tom will be back in a moment. In the meantime, the lines are open at 855-237-2346. Don't go away.
Here's His Grace Bishop Anthony from the Antiochian Diocese of Toledo and the Midwest.
This beautiful ministry, Ancient Faith Ministries, which gives us wonderful lectures, wonderful available resources to live our Orthodox life and to strengthen the local parishes all across this country and indeed all across the world.
Thanks for your support in helping make Ancient Faith Ministries strong. All donations are tax deductible at ancientfaith.com/support. That's ancientfaith.com/support.
A wonderful new tool for Orthodox children. A Child's Guide to the Divine Liturgy is designed as an aid to help children negotiate their way through the Divine Liturgy and learn more about the Church and our faith.
We outlined sort of the major markers of the service, and we wrote it and illustrated so that the child would then remain engaged with the liturgy, so that attention of the child would be moving forward towards the altar, not necessarily down at the book. We didn't want them reading about things. We wanted them experiencing it.
To find this and other books like it, you can go to store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
Father, we're back with Ancient Faith Today and Father Tom Soroka. Give us a call at 855-237-2346. Here once again is Father Tom.
Okay, we're back. Sorry for that technical difficulty. Dr. Furnish, are you on?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me, Father Tom?
Yes, we can hear you. Sorry about that. Thanks for sticking with us. We appreciate it.
Sure.
So here's what we'd like to do. What we want to do is now talk about our encounter with the Islamic forces. As you know, as I said before we lost you there, you know, essentially there is, it seems to me, a big difference here again between Christianity and Islam. Christianity was spread through itinerant preachers, through apostles, through the martyrs. You know, they died for the sake of the Christian faith. They did not kill others. Instead, they simply brought the gospel message. It seems to me that Islam from the very beginning was spread through kind of a military campaign. And we know that Orthodoxy's first encounter was in Syria. I believe it was 635. So can you walk us through the kind of the military expansion and spread of Islam in these traditionally Orthodox lands?
Right. I think you might just be 1 year off, Father Tom, but that's pretty darn good. I think it was 634,
okay,
but
Thank you.
that's very good. Most people couldn't even get the century. So basically, yes. So to back it up just a little bit, Muhammad died in 632, probably. We don't know for sure. He had been run out of Mecca in 622, he and his followers, and they went up to Medina, where he was put in charge. And basically from the city of Medina, the Arab Muslims, of course, the first Muslims were Arabs, then went out and converted most of the tribes in the peninsula to that religion. In 630, after several abortive attempts, Muhammad and an army said to be about 10,000 went back and conquered Mecca. They had to take Mecca. It was, as we said earlier, an important cult center. Also probably the largest town in the peninsula, which wasn't saying much. But anyway, so by 630, he conquered. He died 2 years later. And just within a year or two after that, the Muslim armies are raiding north. Some of them go into Syria, what is now Jordan, Syria. They take Damascus in 634 or so, and it really is kind of strange how inept the Byzantine army, which had been so good for so many years, the Eastern Roman Empire's army, was in these initial encounters with these guys. Now, to be fair, to put it in context, the Byzantine Empire had been fighting for hundreds of years, as had the Romans before them, before they became Christian, with that other superpower to the east called the Persian Empire. In this time period, the Persians were ruled by a dynasty called the Sasanians, who were, interestingly enough, again, you probably know this, but a lot of people don't, they were a religion called Zoroastrianism.
Right.
But anyway, the Byzantines and the Sasanians, it was sort of like, Rocky and Apollo Creed. They had been beating the daylights out of each other for hundreds of years, and no one expected any sort of military threat to come from the deserts of the south, but here it came. And yes, as you talked
and
about,
would that be Iran? Is that modern day Iran?
Yeah,
is that
Persia's modern Iran. Yes, sir. Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Now the Muslim Arab armies, within just a few decades, actually overran the entire Persian Empire, the Sasanian Empire, and conquered it. They did not do the same to the Byzantines. They did manage to take away probably about 40% of the Byzantine Empire's territory, specifically Egypt, Syria, what is now Jordan, which had all been Byzantine, and that was conquered by the Muslims. But the Byzantines held on, as we know, until 1453. But basically,
but they kept taking more and more and more land,
yes.
right? I mean, the Byzantine Empire just kept shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and I think sometimes people forget that. They say the Byzantine Empire fell in 1453, but in 1453 there was almost nothing left except
the city
for
of Constantinople.
Yeah, that was it. I mean, there was nothing else left.
It was a city-state by then, basically. But it's interesting. What's amazing about the Byzantine Empire to me is not that it fell, but that it held on for so long. I mean, 800 and some years. I mean, it was amazing the job that they did, and they didn't always lose. They had a number of significant victories, and there were time periods when they managed to reclaim Syria, reclaim territory. Of course, they never got Egypt back, but they had some competent commanders and competent generals and competent emperors in subsequent time periods. Basically, what it boiled down to was, for the first 3 or 4 centuries, it was the Arabs attacking them. And they fended off. And the Arabs even managed to put together a navy and actually sail up the Bosphorus and attack Constantinople in the 900s a couple of times. Of course, probably even better than the Byzantine army was the Byzantine navy. And the Byzantine navy had that nifty thing called Greek fire, which was basically an early form of napalm, which needless to say, wreaked havoc on the Arabs. And so the Byzantines held off the Arabs for many years. By the time you get to the 900s, about 1000 AD, you've got a new player in the Middle East, the Turks, but not the Ottomans yet, a group called the Seljuk Turks. The Seljuk Turks come in, as do their cousins later, the Ottomans, from Central Asia, and the Turks are related to the Mongols. The Seljuk Turks come in, come through the Abbasid Caliphate, which had been set up on the ruins of the Persian Empire, convert to Islam, and you would get this sort of this repeating cycle where the nomads would come in, various Turkish tribes. They'd be brought into the the Muslim armies, and then eventually they'd turn around and take over. And they were the ones that renewed the attacks against the Byzantines after really a couple of centuries of sort of stability. And the famous Battle of Manzikert in 1071 AD, which is Manzikert's way over in what is now eastern Turkey toward Armenia. And the Seljuk Turks defeated a large Byzantine army under the emperor's command in the year 1071. And after that, that's when they really started losing territory. And they basically lost most of their territories in Anatolia. And the Byzantine Empire was basically in what is now the Balkans and Greece and the city of Constantinople at that point. And then later, of course, a little bit later, here come another group of Turks, the Ottoman Turks. And it's eventually the Ottomans that put together the state that eventually takes down what's left of the Byzantine Empire in 1453.
Right. And that lasts until what, 1920 something, 1930.
22 or 24, depending on the 1920s.
Right. I have some follow-up questions, but we want to go to a phone call right now. We have Tim from Charlotte. Tim, welcome to Ancient Faith Today. You're on the air with Dr. Timothy Furnish.
Well, thank you. First, I have a quick comment, and then I would like to hear the reply, I guess, or his take on it. But one of the problems I have with all of the understanding, I guess, in the dialogue is with Islam and that sort of thing. They give Christ or Jesus a very prominent place but underneath Muhammad, of course, but the first, I guess, among other prophets that they recognize throughout. But my question might be, why would they give that kind of status when they dismiss the essence of his message. They accept other things in his personage, but why wouldn't they just dismiss him out of hand as a crazy false prophet? And then secondly, a comment about some of the revelations that purportedly were received. Them seem to have been revelations of convenience. One in particular, I believe, and I'm not sure I have all the details, but Muhammad was intending to marry a relative's wife or sister that was against the mores of the time, or not seen in the community as correct. And lo and behold, a revelation occurs that gives Muhammad the dispensation to carry out go through with this marriage. Anyway, it just seemed like it was kind of convenient for one to come down at a particular time. But all of this to say, are you familiar with Will Durant, the historian, and his work on the civilization, history of civilization, where he comments on Islam and Muhammad's life and how it came to be a thriving movement?
So you're throwing a lot at him, Tim. Let's go backwards. And are you familiar with the book from Will Durant? And then we want to talk about this idea of abrogation in Islam, and then talk about Jesus in Islam. Okay.
Will Durant specifically on Islam, I have not heard that. Please tell me.
Will's take on it, Mr. Durant. Yeah, in it where he describes the life in the times back then. Of course, there were Jews and Christians and pagans and all of that all around the community, and life in that part of the world was very chaotic, tribal oriented. Retaliatory, tribe against tribe, that kind of thing, every man for himself, kind of disorganized, chaotic kind of life, I guess. And Muhammad, seeing all of this and being, concerned about order or having some sort of sense of community, took from those various faiths aspects that he saw or felt were germane and had merit, and cobbled them together to form basically Islam, or the basis for his teachings. What he said was, compared, I'll just read here, compared with these faiths, the polytheist idolatry, loose morality, tribal warfare, and political disunity of Arabia, it may have seemed somewhat shamefully primitive. He felt the need of a new religion, perhaps of one that would unify all these faction groups into a virile and healthy nation.
Right. That's the idea that Muhammad created used Islam to create sort of a super tribe.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that it was Will Durant had advanced that idea, but that's a common idea in the scholarship, right? Well, I think sociologically there's probably some truth to that. I mean, clearly, and as a Christian, I'm a historian, and I do try to be objective, as Father Tom said earlier, but I am also a Christian, and I think it's clear that it's cobbled together. I mean, for gosh sakes, one of these things, for instance, you often hear in the field, and you'll hear the sort of half-educated talk about is what a wonderful book of clear and beautiful Arabic the Quran is. No, it's not.
Right.
Sometimes it's nonsensical.
You hear that.
Oh my gosh, it's nonsensical. Sometimes a sentence you can't even tell which the subject and the verb don't agree, and it doesn't even make any sense grammatically. Not that my Arabic is perfect, but for gosh sakes, that's just silly. So anyway, I think sociologically that's a good argument. And again, hearkening back to what Father Tom and I were talking about earlier about some of the stuff where, I mean, it's pretty demonstrable. It's pretty demonstrable, I think, that some of the stuff that Islam, for instance, was taken from, as we said, apocryphal gospels. There's a garbled understanding of Jesus, a garbled understanding of various and sundry New Testament figures. And we know that there were Christians in the peninsula of Arabia. We also know there were Jewish communities, because Muhammad had a bunch of them killed in Medina, for instance. So I think it's clear that he cobbled it together from earlier religion. This is why I will say sometimes, and I said this, in fact, in my recent article about Hagia Sophia, that I happen to think there is some good in Islam, but what good in Islam there is only sort of a poor reflection of Christian teachings. That's my belief as a Christian. So, all right, working backwards. What was the second thing you asked about? I'm sorry. Maybe Father Tom remembers.
Sorry. No, it was dismissing. Why wouldn't they just dismiss him if they don't the essence of his his message? They accept some of it, but not the essence of his message. Why wouldn't they just say you're a false prophet and dismiss him as a kook rather than give him such prominence in the Quran?
Right. Well, I think two things. One is I think that, again, Muhammad had encountered a number of Christians in the peninsula, both, heretical and perhaps even some Orthodox, small o or big O, take your choice there. And he had, I think, Muhammad, and there's indication that some of Muhammad's family were even Christians. And I think that Muhammad may have had some respect for Jesus as a religious figure. And also I think that if you are creating a religion that claims to be the successor to the two previous monotheisms, and you leave Jesus out entirely, I think you're undercutting your argument. So what they try to do was they try to incorporate a Jesus in and Islamize Jesus. And I think that's the route they went. And whether it was, if it was, I'm not sure Muhammad was thinking ahead in terms of many, many years. I think it was just something that felt natural to do.